For this discussion, I have selected The Effects of Reward and Punishment on Reaction Times and Autonomic Activity in Hyperactive and Normal Children by Philip Firestone and Virginia Douglas, 1975. In order to give an overview of ADHD, I've put together a few facts about hyperactivity to provide a richer background for a critical analysis of Firestone and Douglas's study. The most important of these, I think, is that ADHD is the most commonly diagnosed illness in childhood. I think that this highlights the relevance of Firestone and Douglas's study regarding behavioural management of hyperactive children and why I found this literature review the most important in exploring punishment as a strategy for behavioural modification. Comparing Firestone and Douglas to Humphrey and Lee's article, Risk-Taking and Sensitivity to Punishment in Children with ADHD, ODD, ADHD and ODD, which is one of the three that I had a look at. Humphrey and Lee measured risk-taking and sensitivity to punishment, whereas Firestone and Douglas compare reward and punishment to reveal their relative effectiveness in changing behaviour of ADHD. Now, bodies of previous research have revealed that positive reinforcement, so things like tokens and pennies, actually reduces inappropriate behaviour in hyperactive children, but disapproval has been largely ignored. And I think that this study filled a gap in the literature regarding the effectiveness of punishment in ADHD children. However, the article does not explicitly express which concepts are independent variables and which are dependent. Presenting punishment as the independent variable and behaviour as the dependent variable would have improved the theoretical framework of the research and clarified how the relationship between these two variables was conceptually defined. So moving on now to the hypothesis and aim. So Firestone and Douglas aimed to determine whether reward, punishment or a combination was most effective in changing the behaviour of hyperactive children. Additionally, they wanted to investigate whether there was a difference in the effectiveness of measures in treating hyperactive children versus a control group of children. So this aim is quite different to Mulvaney and Merva, which is another of the articles that I had a look at, on parental corporal punishment in early childhood. A data collection of childhood temperament and parenting styles is just not considered for focus on reinforcement conditions instead, which relates, I think, more closely to the line of inquiry: is punishment, a reinforcement condition, an effective behaviour modification strategy for children? So, and I thought that the aims in this were clearly stated and both aims logically followed from the background material, and the hypothesis was testable. So just quickly, what is behavioural management? Well, in psychology, it's a type of behavioural therapy in which the principles of operant conditioning, so reinforcement and punishment, are used to eliminate some type of unwanted maladaptive behaviour. So moving now on to the design. Both sample groups were divided into three in the delayed reaction time task. The first was placed under a reward condition, the second under a punishment condition, and the third under a reward plus punishment condition. Now, the reward condition, subjects were asked to respond as fast as possible to the instructions of the examiner. They were encouraged whenever they overreached the baseline mean response time, and there was no feedback for slower mean responses. Under the punishment condition, subjects were required to perform at the same level, but they were told when they were performing too slowly, and there were no responses for faster mean response times. And under the reward punishment condition, subjects were also required to respond just as quickly, just as under the other two conditions. However, this group was alternately punished or rewarded after every trial. It was carried out as a series of baseline trials, where for the first few trials, the subjects were not given any feedback, and only the last 12 were considered to calculate the mean reaction time for the hyperactives and for the control group. I thought that the design method flowed logically from the aims, but not necessarily from the problems proposed in the literature review, as partial schedules were critically raised throughout, but were not considered or used in the design method. The data collection, however, was similar for all samples in the study. So moving along now to the findings. Reaction times in both sample groups, the hyperactives and the controlled, were influenced by subject group, reinforcement condition, and contextual variables. There were three different reinforcement conditions, and they successfully improved reaction times for the hyperactive and for the control group. However, impulsive responses of hyperactive children were significantly increased under the reward condition, a result that was not found under the other two. Overall, the hyperactives responded more slowly than the controls, and the responses were more variable than the controls. Hyperactives also made more interstimulus responses. I thought these findings were reliable, as they were similar to results found in Cohen, Parry, and Douglas, and valid as the descriptive and inferential statistics were appropriate to the hypothesis and to the instruments used in the method. So moving along now to the conclusion and discussion, they're going to wrap up with the limitations. So reward, punishment, and a mixture of the two are equally effective in modifying hyperactive children's behaviour. Firestone and Douglas suggest this is possibly because reward and punishment conditions provide feedback to both hyperactive and controlled children. Firestone and Douglas assert the significant influence of reward reinforcement in effective impulsive responses and interstimulus responses within the hyperactive group possibly suggests attentional deficit. Now, I think impairment of attention is actually a feasible claim, as it often leads to poor performance in ADHD, and Zafig and Brunning 1966 would support this. However, no significant statistical difference between the reinforcement groups for the controlled group results appear to indicate reward punishment and reward punishment are equally effective in modifying behaviour for this sample. Now, just moving on to the limitations. The delayed time reaction task limits conclusions to immediate effects rather than is capable of exploring the unique negative impact of punishment on children's long-term behaviour. Now, Mulvaney and Mulvert, which, as I suggested, was another article I looked at, actually does suggest that punishment contributes to negative behavioural adjustment in children. So I kind of thought that the short duration of the delayed reaction time task may have made it difficult to distinguish between differences in sample groups' relative behaviour. The delay interval remains an important determinant into the effectiveness of punishment, and Solomon, Turner, and Lesak 1968 would support that. So I think that increasing the duration of the delayed reaction time task and more complex tasks as well would have produced different results and be considered in future research. Furthermore, it is possible that the reinforcement was not potent enough. Simply nicer comments and harsher criticism may have produced a larger variance in the results between groups and differences between reinforcement conditions. So that could also be considered in future research. And just lastly, there is little knowledge about the extent to which impulsivity in hyperactive children interferes with performance, and I think this could be an area for further research also. Throughout the method, they were told to avoid interstimulus responses. However, the relationship between reinforcement and impulsivity in hyperactive children really could be better understood and research if the method is designed to actually control impulsivity. Indeed, even punishment could be used to control impulsivity in future research. And that's it. Thank you.